Hello to the pessimistic, optimistic, and everything in between. My name is Connor Philippi, and welcome back to the Minnesotan Sports Podcast. And a very exciting weekend for the Minnesota Vikings as they have a huge win against the Green Bay Packers. But it kind of overshadowed, thankfully, we had some sort of solace because it overshadowed the fact that the Twins gave up huge ground in the AL Central and are now in third place. So basically going into the series, this 3-game series against the Guardians, we were only a game and a half behind, and we thought, okay, well, even if we lose one of these, we win 2 out of 3, we can only be a half game behind, and we've got plenty of games left to go, including a 5-game series. We're in pretty good shape still if we can at least win this series. Of course, that didn't happen. The Guardians win pretty convincingly every single game. It was kind of close at the end of those. You know, in the first game, we ended up losing 7-6, and we came back, scored 6 unanswered, and almost tied the game up. But again, we didn't score early enough to make that happen. And then game 2 and 3 were both also pretty convincing. A couple late game heroics, but again, to no avail in the second game. And the third game was just a joke all the way through. So this puts us at 4.5 now behind the Cleveland Guardians for first place in the AL Central. And not only that, we're now 2 games behind the White Sox, who are now 2.5 behind the Guardians. So not only do we have to climb all the way back up, beat the Guardians, which is something we could in theory do, because we still have a 5-game series against them, but we'd have to win all 5. There's still 20 games left in the season. Anything could happen, but with a horrid 3-game series against them, there's not a whole lot of chance that we can even win 3 or 4 against them in that long series. So it's not looking great for your Minnesota Twins, and it's just a whole flurry of things that could be the issue. But I'll talk about that, and then we're also going to be going over just kind of an update on the entire playoff race for both sides, AL and NL, just kind of breaking down how the playoff field stands so far and just kind of looking at what could potentially change going into the playoffs. And then once we get there, I'll do a full breakdown, no matter whether the Twins are in it or not. I'll do a full breakdown of who I think will win each series and all that. But I'm getting way ahead of myself here, but we're just going to go through each division. But we'll start with the AL Central, where the Twins are, like I said, in pretty deep trouble. And this could stem from a number of things. And, you know, the most optimistic of Twins fans, which I don't know if there's very many optimistic Twins fans left, but the most optimistic of Twins fans would argue, okay, just like last year, we just had so many injuries. And that is true. You know, we have Buxton hurt. What else is new? Max Kepler just got moved to the IL after coming out of last night's game with a ball off the, I can't remember exactly where, somewhere in the leg, hit a ball off of himself, and now he's out. Malley is also out, and now on top of that, we had Chris Archer now on the 15-day IL. So we brought in Winder to have some relief for Malley, but now who else are we going to have that's going to come up? We have so many young guys who are almost there, but just not quite. So we're in a big pickle with our pitching situation, and you can say, yeah, chalk that down to injuries. And we do have kind of the bottom 4 of our starting hitting lineup is basically just guys that wouldn't have been on the starting team at the beginning of the year. We just have had so many issues with injuries. But you can argue that's the reason why we're not firmly in first place, or that's the reason why we're not a serious playoff contender where, you know, you could say, yeah, we're not going to be able to contend against the Yankees or Astros because of the injuries. But you can't say that those injuries are an excuse for us currently being 69-70 and under 500 for one of the first times this entire year, because that is ridiculous. And for the amount of talent we still have on our roster, even with all those injuries, it's still not a good excuse for how poorly we've performed these last, basically since we had a pretty big lead in May, June. Ever since then, we've been playing very underwhelming baseball, and we thought bringing in Malley would make a difference, but it sure didn't. Jorge Lopez has been good, and Malley immediately got hurt as soon as he came here, but even with those guys gone, we should have at least won this division. And it's pretty ridiculous that we are currently sitting almost 5 games out at this point, given the fact that the Guardians have been well known for being able to salt games away, and they have had a lot of comeback wins this year, but especially against us, they are not a team that should pose any threat to a potential threat to win the division, and we just completely sat down and let them take whatever they wanted in that series. And I'm going to chalk it down to one thing, which is leadership. Now, obviously, there's a lot of contributing factors, but at the end of the day, the whole thing has been based around this idea that our leadership just has not developed a winning culture. We haven't developed a winning culture since we won the World Series in 1991. And yes, there's been some years where in 2009 and 2010 we had some good teams, and we won it in 2002 and 2003. Of course, I mean the division. I would never say we won the World Series since 1991. But that 1991 World Series was the last time we had a firm winning culture. We had that from 1987 to 1991, and that's been the longest winning culture we've had in years. Because we had that one flash in 2019, but that did not turn into anything. It just didn't. And when you've got talented players like, Max Kepler, he's got his moments. He's not necessarily like the huge big player that we've had in the past, but he is still a very talented player. Jorge Polanco, Luis Ariz, Byron Buxton, and then Carlos Correa comes on. I mean, these are all guys that if you put on the same team, in theory, you should at least have a division-winning team, and paired with some decent pitching, you could go fairly far in the playoffs. But we just have never gotten to a point where we feel like we can contend for the playoffs in any meaningful way, no matter what team we've put on the field. And the only difference there was a flash-in-the-pan team that hit a bunch of home runs in 2019. That is a very distant memory now. It didn't have to be a distant memory, but we just completely gave up on that team, and we just stopped competing after that year. And again, I'm chalking it down to a lot of leadership type things, because I think we can really draw a lot of parallels, honestly, to the Minnesota Vikings. This offseason, the reason why we brought in Kevin O'Connell, usually teams will bring in a new head coach when they have a really bad losing season. They win 3-4 games with a team that, it's not the best team, but you're just playing so awfully that you just don't think that this coach can make you contend. But with the Vikings, we fired Mike Zimmer and brought in Kevin O'Connell because we were only winning 9 to 8 games each season, and it wasn't a sense of like, oh, we just suck. It's a sense of we could be so much more, but this entire leadership has gone stale, and this entire team has gone stale. And whether we have young talent or old talent, whether we're developing or exciting talent or anything like that, we just were running stale, and the same offense was being run, the same defense was being run, and it was just a situation where it felt like the players just weren't 100% in it. And of course, this is more spiritually and emotionally. I'm not saying that the team necessarily just stopped trying and decided they didn't want to play anymore, but it was that same situation where they just didn't have that extra fire, that extra fuel that came with a more exciting team that, it ran stale. And the Minnesota Twins are in that exact same pickle where you can't say that they suck. You can't say that they're this bad team that is losing 100 games a year, that needs a complete change of the guard, that needs to be completely blown up. And sometimes when you're in that situation, you don't want to get rid of any coaching staff. You don't want to make too many changes because you're afraid, if we make too many changes, we're going to start losing more games. And organizations can be really comfortable with this mindset of, okay, let's just win enough games where we can keep selling tickets, we can keep feeling like we're winning enough games to be relevant, even though we're not going to make the playoffs or we're only going to win one game in the playoffs or anything like that. And when you get into that comfort zone, you're just not going to grow as a team and you're not going to win enough games to really contend. And it just really feels like this leadership in this organization has gotten to that point where, yes, Rocco Baldelli is a great coach to come in and win you enough games to keep you relevant, but it just doesn't feel like these guys want to play for Rocco Baldelli enough where, it's not a lack of effort. It's not a lack of hustle. It's just that there's this mental game inside players' heads when they just keep losing like this, where it just becomes tough to play at your absolute 110%. And the teams that play at their absolute 110%, they have more chemistry and they fit better together, and it just results in more wins. It's not something that you can see on the stat page. It's just not. You don't see those types of things improving ERA by a drastic margin. It's creating more situations where when you've got runners on first, second, and third, you have that big impact play, which is something we've been really missing this year. Those are the types of things that aren't teachable, or they're a little teachable, but they're really not that teachable. And they're not based off of stats. They're not based off of anything like that. It's, can you come up clutch? And we just seem to be lacking that, and I think a lot of that has to do with our leadership. And it just becomes a really frustrating situation where we have the team, but we just aren't seeing the wins. And it's hard to see the parallel between that, but I think it all comes down to, look at our runners left on base this season. I don't have it pulled up, but every single game you look, and it's like 15 or 16 like total, these guys just are not hitting well enough in those big situations, and it just becomes such a struggle to deal with and put up with as a fan when we have such a talented team around us. And yes, injuries have been a concern, but you can't say that that's an excuse for how many games we have just been throwing away this season due to just a lack of clutch hitting, and it's really sunk us this season. So Guardians are currently 4.5 ahead, and as it stands right now, we would be playing, or the Cleveland Guardians would be playing Toronto in that first wild card series. Houston would have that first round bye, as would the Yankees, and then the Tampa Bay Rays would currently be hosting Seattle. And I think it's pretty clear right now that Houston is the clear favorite right now in the AL. And the Yankees have been kind of starting to win more here. And, they've got some guys back. They've been dealing with some injuries. But this Astros team has just been lighting it up, especially defensively. They've got runs against 458 this season. I mean, that's just insane to have that few runs against. And Justin Verlander, a clear Cy Young candidate, and their entire starting rotation and bullpen is just off the charts. And when you have a pitching staff like that, all you really need is a slightly above average hitting core, and you can really make noise in the playoffs. And they have a very above average hitting core as well. So I think Houston's on a collision course to making it to their fourth straight World Series, which I hate to say. And then the Yankees obviously are always a threat. It's just that they seem to be lacking something the last few years in the postseason, where they used to be just super clutch in the postseason. They always used to just you could always count on them to get the job done in the playoffs, and there just seems to be a missing spark. And I don't know if it's that Yankees effect that people always talk about, where it's tough for some players to show up in the big moments wearing that uniform with that much pressure, so much history behind it. It's what happened to Joey Gallo. I don't know what it is, but it seems like the Yankees just haven't quite been as clutch as they have been in the playoffs. But obviously they're going to make it. They're going to win the division. There was a stretch there where the Rays were only 4.5 behind, and it is still pretty close. But I just don't see that happening. Most likely Yankees will be in second. And then the Rays, the Mariners, and the Blue Jays all seem to be pretty similar. They're building their team based on their youth, based on their They're guys that they've built up in the farm system. Obviously, the Mariners and the Blue Jays have brought in some guys over the past couple of years that have helped them. But what I really love about these teams is that they've really been able to build their young core inwardly, which is something that these smaller market teams have to do. And it's really impressive that we're seeing multiple small market teams in this situation above teams that have a lot higher a payroll than them. And then Baltimore is the first team out of the playoffs. They're 5.5 behind, so it's going to be a tough hill for them to climb to get back into this race. And then let's take a quick look also at the National League before we close this episode out. LA Dodgers, 96-43, best record in the league, and they are a shoo-in for the NL West. I almost forgot the division. They're almost a shoo-in for the NL West. They've basically already won it. And then the Mets are actually in a really tight race with Atlanta, so we'll see how that shakes out. And then you've got St. Louis, who is a good 8 games ahead of Milwaukee for the division there. And that usually is just the weakest division in that league, and it still is this year, but it's not that far away now. Mets Cardinals should be a pretty good series if it gets to that point. But then you've got teams, even the 6th seed, San Diego, is 77-64. Like, these are some good wild card teams. Philadelphia is 5th, and then Atlanta is 4th, and they could easily still take this from the Mets. So we'll see how that goes. And Milwaukee is still only 2 games behind in the wild card, so still a lot of good narratives there between them and San Diego. But we'll see how that plays out. But the rest of the stretch, there's a lot of things that could still happen, but I will definitely bring you predictions and breakdowns of the playoffs whenever that happens, and I'll also kind of throw in some updates of how the Twins are doing as we continue to go on. Maybe I'll do one more of these updates after the next series we have with the Guardians, because by that point, either we'll be right back into it because we won a lot of those games, or the Guardians most likely won 3 or 4, and it's basically over for us for the rest of the season. So I'll detail all that as well, and I'm really excited for October here as pretty much all these sports are heating up. A lot of NHL and NBA also to kind of start breaking down as the season starts. So a lot of fun to come, but thank you so much for watching this one, and we'll see what happens with the Twins. I'm not too confident, and you shouldn't be either, but we'll see what happens. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the flip side.